Here there is a discussion on the problem of duty and work and spiritual life. How to reconcile both. Here is a long discussion. To work without any attachment is to work without the expectation of any reward or fear of any punishment in this world or the next. This idea has been elaborately discussed in texts like Gita, where Lord Krishna gives a long description of the psychology and also the philosophy of work without desire, without attachment. But Sri Ramakrishna, in course of time, will come to that point. The subtopic here is the difficulty of the problem in this age. In this age, in the last decade, maybe the last 2-3 decades of 19th century, and that is very, very much true in our own times too. Work without attachment, however, is exceedingly difficult, especially in this age. The fact is, one must have true knowledge or love of God. It's possible for the ideal man alone to live a life of work without attachment. Others get easily attached, more or less, to things of the world, and they know it not. Hence, it's our duty as imperfect men to find out, if possible, the shortest path that leads to God, the end of our life. Let us do the duty that is nearest to us. Let us bring down our work to a minimum by earnest prayer and self-surrender. Now, Sri Ramakrishna makes a very interesting point in this context, maybe in the main gospel. This is of the condensed version, Yem's own translation of his diaries, originally written in Bengali into English. Now, Sri Ramakrishna says, if you take an active interest in spiritual life, your attitude towards work, your concept of work will gradually evolve, will undergo a change. The work doesn't change. There will be no end to work. But our attitude, our concept of duty, our concept of responsibility will change. How this happens? Sri Ramakrishna discusses this point. He says, he gives an example from the setting, from domestic setting, the life of a housewife. It may not be very relevant in this country, perhaps in this age, and maybe in many modern urbanized societies. This may not be very applicable as it used to be in the later decades of 19th century all over the world. See, if a housewife gets into family way of life, and she's expecting a child, as the time progresses, her mother-in-law takes over most of the responsibilities and will lighten the work, reduce the work of the young housewife. This is an example from, of course, you have to remember this is an illustration from a cultural setting. When we read great spiritual classics like Sri Ramakrishna's Gospel or even the Bible or any great universal spiritual classics, you have to remember many of the illustrations, imageries, examples and parables will be drawn from the cultural and geographical, historical settings in which that prophet, the spiritual personality is born. This we have to keep in mind. The parables of the Bible, for example, many of them are taken from the settings of nomadic, pastoral life of Palestine, Judah, maybe the 1st or 2nd century BC, perhaps 1st century AD also. So such examples you find. So illustrations and parables and examples will be mostly taken from the cultural and historical setting of the age in which the prophet lives. And when language may be influenced by the language into which he is born or she is born. So here the example is, this is the simple example from a domestic setting. Now coming to its universal application, what Sri Ramakrishna says is, see, when we think that work is the only thing to do, work is the only thing that we should be concerned with. Duty is the only thing that's a guiding motto of our life. We all live for work. Work is the supreme motto. Work as an end in itself. Kant philosophized this concept, duty for duty's sake. So there he took the ideal of work to a higher philosophical setting. That was a great contribution in the critical practical reason. So duty for duty's sake, duty not necessarily because it's a compulsion, it is related to, it is linked to a result or a fruit of labor that you are aiming at. No, duty for its own sake. So it is a higher, a nobler, a more sublime concept in Kant. But in spiritual life, it goes even beyond that. Certain things that we consider to be inevitable, unavoidable, so long as we think that material comfort is the only end in its only goal of human life. Some of those duties will cease to exist, will disappear the moment our priorities change. The moment we undergo a shift in emphasis, a shift in priorities, then our attitude towards non-spiritual duties and responsibilities, which normally create a lot of tension and pressure in our mind, they all vanish. That's what really happens. For example, people who spend a lot of time in computer games, or maybe watching the 49ers, I think that's what it's called. Long hours of watching the TV, football, 4 or 5 hours. Now, they consider that that's a very important thing to do. Not that it's a duty, but it is something to be done. They don't consider that watching the 49ers in action is a very important responsibility. That may not be the case. Or watching or doing computer games or maybe watching TV and other music, dancing and all those things. They may not consider these things as very important, totally unavoidable, but they do not consider them to be irrelevant. They are not irrelevant to them. They are not essential or unavoidable. So naturally, the natural instincts and the sense and the natural desire for sensory, fleeting, momentary pleasures will force them to spend a lot of time in these pastimes. Now suppose the same person turns to spiritual life. Then he starts thinking of something higher. He happens to read some books on meditation or contemplation or any higher life. Then what happens? He may perhaps the beginning he may reduce the time spent on watching the TV, the 49ers and such things, and a little more time he may spend for meditation and contemplation. And gradually there is a shifting of emphasis, a change in the priorities taking place in his attitude. So what happens? His so-called duties, so-called responsibilities, so-called engagements gradually undergo a change. That's what happens in spiritual life, and that's as applicable in our own age as the idea was originally applicable, means as idea was expounded, the age in which Sri Ramakrishna expounded this idea in the later decades of 19th century. That's what Sri Ramakrishna says. So Sri Ramakrishna says the problem solved for this age, again you have to remember 19th century, the last decades of 19th century. Thus, on account of the difficulty of work without attachment in this age, communion by prayer, devotion and love, by the practice of Narada's Bhakti Yoga, as being enjoined as better adapted to this age than the communion by work or communion by the path of knowledge or philosophy. I shall explain this because this may not be easily comprehensible. Narada was a great philosopher of devotional philosophy. He lived maybe 6th or 7th century BC, not the mythological sage Narada. He must have been a philosopher. So he has written a well-known book, Narada Bhakti Sutra, which is one of the most well-known ancient work on devotional philosophy. He makes certain very important statements. He says devotion is supreme surrender, supreme attachment to Almighty God, and the easiest way to practice the devotion in modern age, the age of tension, the age of complexities of various types, is to take the name, the holy name of God. These are some of his instructions. So Sri Ramakrishna says, in modern times, when we have so many things to do and so many duties, so many work which we consider to be unavoidable, which we consider to be very important, if we start practicing the simplest form of devotional practice, taking the name of God, slowly a paradigm shift, a shifting of emphasis, a change in priorities will start taking place in our mind. And we will start spending less and less time on things which we consider to be very important prior to this time, this change. And will start spending more and more time in meditation, contemplation, holy reading, and so on. This is the implication of the statement that Mother will take away many of our duties and responsibilities and work as we progress in spiritual life. These are Sri Ramakrishna statements. But adapting to our own times, we can say, as we take the first step in spiritual life, we naturally change the order of priorities. Certain things that we considered to be very important and unavoidable, or perhaps which we considered not irrelevant. See, like for watching the computer, TV, or spending time in computer games for long hours. We don't think they are very important, but we don't think that they are not unimportant. We don't think they are totally irrelevant. But once you enter the spiritual life, once we take the first step in spiritual life, we slowly develop the idea these things are not so very important. These things can be dispensed with. They need not be pursued further. They can be got rid of. That feeling comes. So slowly these duties, worldly duties, will slowly get reduced, they will decrease, and finally we will automatically, unconsciously, due to this change of priorities taking place in our mind, we will start spending more and more time in devotional or spiritual pursuits. That's what happens. Now here, effect of devotion upon work. No one, however, can avoid work, Sri Ramakrishna says. Every mental operation is work. So in a way, meditation is a work, not physical work, not work at the physical level, but at the intellectual and spiritual level. But well, if you consider meditation as a work and include that work among various other works and duties, then you find some good things, some spiritual practices are also scrupulously, tenaciously pursued by us. So that will gradually influence our mind and help us in this shifting of priorities. The consciousness that I feel, the I think involves work. What is meant by the path of devotion is, in its relation to work, is that work is simplified by devotion or love. Simplified means it is reduced. Elsewhere, Sri Ramakrishna gives the imagery, the illustration. If If a real devotee sincerely turns to spiritual life, his material pulls and pressures and tensions will slowly vanish. Gita makes a statement, Yogakshemam Vahami Aham. Yogakshemam actually means the welfare, spiritual and material welfare of the devotee will be looked after by God. Because once you start bothering about a higher life, getting busy with the idea of a higher life, then God will naturally reduce the problems, the tensions, and will try to smoothen the path that you have to follow in your spiritual life. Sometimes this happens in a very, very unexpected and very unpleasant and very shocking way. So there is a famous verse in the devotion classics. Yasya anugraham ichchami tasya vittam haramiham bandhavaisa viyogena bhrisham bhavadi dukkhidaha tena dukkhena samtruptu yadimam na parityajit tam prasadam karishyami yadevairabi sudurlabham. I shall explain this in English, which is very interesting and very touching, in fact, very, very practical. The statement is this. If God wants to help you, then He doesn't make you billionaire. If you're a billionaire and if you have a sincere devotion to God, also at the same time you're also very much concerned about the changing stock markets, then what God does is He will reduce your bank account. He may even turn to you the pauper. That's the meaning of the word. See, yes, tasya vittam haramiha means I shall steal his wealth. See the language, the forceful language in which the idea is put. The ancient devotion classics used very forceful language. The language is sometimes quite shocking. So God will steal your wealth if He finds that you are a sincere devotee. And then He will take away your wealth. Means He will may not turn you pauper, but He will put you in such a position that you will be forced to consider wealth and all this material prosperity, all the things, as totally irrelevant. But only one condition: if you are sincere. If you are as yesterday we mentioned, perhaps in today's class, Iswaranji's book. If religion or spirituality is one of the several pursuits, a fashion, if it's a fashion, one of the many other things that we pursue, then God will not give you so much trouble. Or let you continue both. And because we are not so much bothered about spiritual progress, so God will not take the trouble to interfere. It's called divine intervention. In fact, in Christian theology, miracles were often interpreted as divine interventions. And the persecutions and other the difficulties which the great mystics had to undergo were interpreted by the theologians as sure proof that these are all divine interventions. Miracle is a divine intervention. But here also you find that divine intervention will take place only if you are sincere. That's the idea behind. So, and again, he will be isolated from his friends and relatives, because if you are so much obsessed with family relationship, worldly relationship, and if our worldly bondage becomes an obstacle in our spiritual path, and if you are sincere, then God will make you isolated from them. Bandhavaisa viyogena. Bhrisham bhavadi dukkhidaha means you become terribly upset, grief-stricken. Or my relatives, my relations don't bother about me. And you become extremely upset, because at that time you are not progressed, but you are sincere, honest. Then what happens? Still, if you don't give up God, so you have lost your wealth, And actually, if you don't have wealth, people won't bother much about you. Your relations will leave you. And so it's a change process. And then, but still, you don't desert God. God, you have taken. I am not rich. I have prayed for wealth, and you have not given me anything. And my relations, they're also totally disinterested. So I won't bother much about you. Then God will return all the wealth to you. All right, go ahead. You need not worry much about spirituality. But still, if the seeker doesn't give up God, that's why. Tena dukhena samtapto yadi mam na parityajit. Still, in spite of all the grief, all the miseries, so-called miseries, misfortunes, still if you don't give up God, then God will take you to such a high level, to such a high spiritual level, that you will be an envy even to gods. Gods is more plural gods. Celestial beings, let us say archangels, angels, and so on. You will be an envy even to angels, because you will become so blessed. You will be elevated to such a spiritual level that even the angels will be jealous of you. But at a heavy cost. You have, if you are sincere, extremely sincere, then God finds out you are really sincere, but there are many obstacles in your path. See, wealth, for example. You are obsessed with wealth, attached to wealth. Well, I shall remove that obstacle from his path. And he removes wealth. And still, if you are attached to your relations and friends and others which stand in the way of spiritual progress, then what happens? He gets us isolated from them. And still, if you do not give up God, do not give up spiritual pursuit, then it's a trial. Sometimes we call dark night of the soul, the days of temptations. You find the life of Jesus, Buddha, and so on. To undergo a particular period of trials and tribulations. But they didn't give up. So then they would be elevated to such a high level. Maybe a very classical illustration is found in the life of the saint whom I mentioned yesterday, sometimes called the reluctant saint. Saint Joseph or Saint Lucipe, yesterday I mentioned, Yes, this man, he was born more as a moron. Born a very poor family. His father was an alcoholic, a carpenter. Mother was a tyrant, and who pushed him to a monastery where he didn't want to go. He was not willing to become a monk, but he was forced. But then somehow he developed a great devotion to Virgin Mary and used to pray, and that took him to a higher level. And he had to undergo many trials and tribulations, as most Christian mystics had to undergo during those centuries. So, this is what happens. So, duties will be reduced, and as a result, there is a shifting of priorities taking place in our mind, and slowly, spiritual pursuit becomes more and more important. Everything else becomes less and less important. That's what really happens. But in Gita, the Lord makes a supreme promise. In their case, I shall intervene. I shall take the responsibility. So divine intervention in Vedanta means God taking care of your affairs when you completely forget your material affairs and turns completely to God. When you turn to God completely, even neglecting your material responsibilities, all other things, then God intervenes and takes over the responsibility. It becomes His responsibility. There are many such stories in the devotion classics. So no greater mistake can be committed than to look upon work as the be-all and the end-all of human life, the supreme destination of life. So Sri Ramakrishna says there cannot be greater mistake. But this you have to remember, It is from the standpoint of spiritual life. In the Gita and other books, you find 4 levels of evolution in the concept of work. Kantian concept of duty for its own sake also finds its place in this ancient work. The lowest stage is total absence of work, lethargy, laziness. The most degraded attitude towards work, lethargy, doing nothing, neither intellectual nor spiritual nor physical. That is to be avoided at all costs. So if somebody is totally lazy and lethargic and sleeping, nidra alasya pramadoktam tat tamasamudakam. This is guna, tamo guna means lowest, darkness, ignorance, delusion, lethargy, laziness, everything all combined. That's tamo guna, means the lowest stage, always to be avoided, the most degraded stage. The next stage is work with desire. A man or a woman who works hard for some material pursuit with a strong ambition in mind, with a lot of enthusiasm, that person is always superior to a person who is absolutely lazy, inactive. Not because he is interested in spiritual life. He is not even interested in spiritual life. He is not interested in anything. Not different from a piece of wood or a rock. So, compared to such a person, an ambitious man of action is superior. But there is a higher level. If we can combine this enthusiasm and also total non-attachment to the results of work, then that's a higher level. But for this non-attachment, we need a shifting of priorities. We have to turn our mind to a higher spiritual and more sublime ideal of life. Then this non-attachment towards the fruits of actions will come. For such people, work is not the supreme goal of existence. Work is only means leading to a higher goal. Work never becomes the destination, but work is a means to a higher goal. Because work is something totally unavoidable, so work is turned into work without desire. I mean, karma is turned into karma yoga, as we call it. So, and Sri Ramakrishna says, work is the first chapter of human life. Human evolution, work is the first chapter. Some kind of activity and restrained activity combined with wisdom is the next stage. Work is the first phase for normal person. Of course, far below is the absence of work due to ignorance. That is not taken into consideration. But in normal evolution, work is the first stage because it is natural. Everyone works, does something, some kind of work. So, Sri Ramakrishna says, work is the first chapter of human life. And the last chapter, the conclusion, is God. Now, Sri Ramakrishna is here referring to one of his household disciples. He's a great devotee, but and not taken completely to spiritual life. Among Sri Ramakrishna's household disciples, there were great men and women. Yoginma, Gulabma, like such great women devotees. And there were also great men like Nagamahasya and Balram Basu. They were all householders, but in the sense they were not monks, but they were as great as monks, because in spite of all their domestic responsibilities, they had sterling spiritual qualities and characteristics. But Shambhu Malik belongs to an intermediary stage of evolution. He had devotion, but he didn't belong to the highest order of devotees like Balram Basu and others. Here Sri Ramakrishna is referring to an occasion involving this householder devotee, Shambhu Malik. On one occasion, Shambhu, a householder, said to me, I should deem myself fortunate if I could build hospitals and dispensaries, lay roads where there are none, sink wells for the good of people in seasons of drought, set up schools and colleges. Thereupon I said to him, it's all very well that you should do all these works, but can you do them unattached, without attachment? If you can, it will lead you to God. Otherwise, not. But to work unattached is exceedingly difficult. In any case, take care and do not confound the means with the end. What Sri Ramakrishna says is, all these are great works, no doubt, but they become tools, instruments for spiritual progress if they are performed, if they are done without attachment. Otherwise, it is always good to do something. See, a person who makes a huge donation to a philanthropical society or organization or any kind of activity is certainly superior, much greater than a stingy, miserly person who accumulates wealth without distributing, without making any distribution. No doubt about it. Because the one who spends money maybe for name and fame, he may want the hospital to be named after him, or he may want his name to appear in the newspapers as a great philanthropist. That person is certainly far superior to a person who doesn't make any contribution because he is so attached and is a classical miser who puts everything in a big pot and buries and doesn't know where it is gone, forgets the place where he has buried it. So there is no doubt. But Sri Ramakrishna says these philanthropical activities, apart from benefiting people in large numbers, become a great spiritual tool, a means for one's own spiritual progress if they are done without much attachment. That's what Sri Ramakrishna says. So if you can do it without attachment, it leads you to God. Otherwise, not. Sometimes this work, when not done without non-attachment, when performed with great obsession and attachment, can become a bondage, can even take one away from spiritual pursuit. He may get entangled in wranglings and litigations and over names, fame, status and reputation. That may perhaps have an adverse effect from a spiritual point of view. But if it is done without any attachment, it becomes as great a spiritual practice as meditation and japa and so on. So that's the secret of work. But to work unattached is exceedingly difficult. In any case, take care and do not confound the means with the end. Work is a means if done unattached, but the end of life is to see God. Let me repeat that. The means should not be confounded with the end, that the first stage on a road should not be taken for the goal. Do not regard work as the be-all and the end-all, the ideal of human existence. Pray for devotion to God. Suppose you are fortunate enough to see God, then what would you pray for? Would you pray for dispensaries and hospitals, tanks and wells and roads and other things? This is a very interesting question now. Because hospitals and roads can be constructed even by people or by anybody without bothering about spirituality or God or transcendental ideas. They can be performed. So Sri Ramakrishna says, if you happen to have a vision of God, will we pray for what a rich man can do? See, so you equate God with a rich man. It's the idea behind. So God is not just a rich man. A rich man can do all this. See, God is no better than a rich person with good motives. That's why He's something higher. He can give us something which money cannot buy, which even the richest man may not be able to accomplish with all the bank account at his disposal. So we have to look for something higher than philanthropy. Philanthropy is good, but philanthropy is there is something higher than philanthropy, and is spiritual pursuit. Philanthropy cannot give you mental peace. That's one interesting thing. Philanthropy, unless it is done with total non-attachment, cannot give us mental peace. That is something very interesting. Ultimately, what is the criterion whether we are moving towards God, whether we are progressing in spiritual life, whether evolving or not? As I said yesterday, the most visible sign, the most visible external symbol of a spiritually growing person is he is at peace with himself and he is at peace with the rest of the world. It doesn't mean that he is always laughing and smiling and in a state of jubilation. The idea is he may have to encounter problems which common people do encounter, but they will not shake him or her. That's the most visible sign. You remain unshaken. It will not be something which can unsettle. There are people, somebody in a seminar or somewhere, I was quoting a verse in the 12th chapter Bhagavad Gita. Lord Krishna makes a statement, who is an ideal devotee. So santushta sadadam yogi yatatma dridhanishchaya. So when means is a santushta means a person who feels an inner blissfulness, tranquility, an inexplicable, indescribable state of inner happiness. Not happiness related to getting something tangible, but a most inexplicable inner peacefulness, tranquility, blissfulness. And he won't be shaken by anything. Now, you find in this world many strong-willed men and women who are not shaken by anything. Nothing can unsettle them. I need not give illustration. There have been many. Classical example, you can find Napoleon. He was not bothered, even after he was sent to St. Helena and St. Elba. He was dictating his memories and all that, walking up and down. You find how he spent his days in St. Helena and St. Elba. Except during the last few days, he felt somewhat miserable. Otherwise, he was quite in. He was such a strong-willed man. But you don't call him a saint. He was certainly not a spiritual person. Even not according to him at least. Now, just think of it. So, strong will, a state of being totally unshaken, that is not a sign of spirituality. With this state of strong will, if one feels an inner blissfulness, being at peace with oneself, that's the first sign of spiritual life. That's why Lord Krishna is santushtaka, means person who is at peace with himself, because he feels that he has got something higher than which there is nothing to be gained, nothing to be sought after, nothing to be striven for. There is nothing higher to achieve. Now, anything other than spiritual growth cannot give you this feeling. If you become a trillionaire, you may have decided to become a quadrillionaire. So, anything in the material world will always have a higher level. But in spiritual life, this inner contentment, blissfulness, is something inexplicable. And this is felt by all not necessarily when we reach the highest spiritual experience. Even when we read, when we listen to certain things, and if we can feel there is something sublime, something it gives us inner tranquility in that shows that we are experiencing a fraction of this blissfulness. This is the first sign of making spiritual progress. Even the feeling that, well, I am not making any progress at all, it emerges because there is a fraction of blissfulness that we experience. This is not enough, shows that you have got something. Comparative degree cannot be used unless you have already got something. So this idea behind. So Sri Ramakrishna says, do not regard work as the be-all and end-all of human existence. So pray for devotion. That's the idea behind. Now we can perhaps discuss some ideas which you would like to propose, and we can discuss.
When you say inner contentment, so you're contented with what you have outside. I mean, okay, I have enough wealth and I have happy relationships, or it doesn't seem right. Can you explain that?
Oh yes. Now, a spiritual seeker will feel a kind of inner blissfulness, which is qualitatively entirely different from the contentment or satisfaction which comes to a millionaire when he makes money. Because at the material plane, at the empirical plane, whatever you get at the empirical level may give you a momentary happiness, but it is followed by unhappiness, because after some time he comes to know there is a much richer person. So he would like to be as rich as the other one. So there is no end in material pursuit. So blissfulness will not come out of that kind of contentment. Blissfulness is something stable, it is permanent, an inner harmony that we feel. Even spiritual pursuit will give us a fraction, not in its complete evolved form, a fraction of this blissfulness. That's the idea. So qualitatively it is entirely different from what we call contentment, which comes to a rich man, when a rich, ambitious, greedy man when he gets wealth. No, it's entirely different. Because before he got wealth, he was unhappy. Even after gaining wealth, there was always an anxiety in his mind. Am I going to lose this? If I invest in stocks, perhaps what will be the result? And be watching the fluctuation in stock market, do you think such a man will be in a state of blissfulness? So there will be always anxiety, which is related to the opposite of blissfulness. So it is not possible even to have a fraction of this blissfulness at the material plane, whatever one may achieve. It is possible only when we get a glimpse of this higher transcendental wealth, we call it. That's what it is called. So that's why in Gita says Sukham Atyandikam Yettad Buddhigrahim Atindriyam. See, here Krishna is speaking about Atyandikam Sukham, means the eternal, everlasting, imperishable state of contentment or blissfulness, which is beyond mind and intellect and senses. Every other form of satisfaction is related to mind and the senses. Mind will change. Mind may become happy, but mind will become unhappy next moment. We should never trust our mind. This is very interesting. Mind is subject to change. Mind may become happy now, I may unhappy next moment. So that's why this blissfulness goes beyond mind, intellect and the senses. When we see a beautiful picture, a painting, it gives us joy. When we go out of the gallery, the art gallery, It's no more there. So also in mind. But this state of blissfulness, and may I tell you, if you don't mind, unless you get a fraction of this, you won't be able to continuously attend these programs. It's a gradual example. I mentioned this point last time. It is stated in one of our scriptures. Even a little interest for listening to spiritual ideas is linked to a state of inner blissfulness. In Sanskrit, in the Vedanta scriptures called Sravanam. Sravanam means listening to spiritual ideas. The first step. Because by listening, these ideas enter our mind. We may not be able to continue this. Those who are seriously interested will continue. Others may not. But still, unless we feel a kind of inner blissfulness, we will not be able to continue this. To give an example, every other pursuit that gives us happiness at the sensory level gives us something tangible. Something tangible. But here nothing tangible here. Nothing tangible. Nothing that is visible. See, somebody telling you are Atman, you are Supreme Consciousness. It doesn't give you anything very tangible. If somebody tells you are great and big and all that is all right at a sensory level. You read a book and that the book tells you are the all-pervading reality. You are the immanent reality, the transcendental reality. What tangible joy, what tangible pleasure do you get out of this? If somebody tells you can go to heaven and there everything will be wonderful, at least we can understand there is something very pleasant to listen to at least. But here nothing. So here the Sri Ramakrishna, of course, I'm talking about the highest spiritual pursuit. Even listening to monotheistic ideas is helpful in our spiritual life. Now, Sri Ramakrishna tries to drive home this idea with an illustration which is well known, which is taken from the Upanishadic literature. It's called Go ahead, Charai Vedi. You find in the Upanishadic Vedic literature. The illustration is given by Sri Ramakrishna in a very dramatic and highly graphic style. Therefore, never lose sight of this goal of life that I have pointed out to you. So always keep your eyes and mind on a high pedestal, on a very high ideal. Never lose sight of the ideal. In this connection, I will tell you a parable. Here's a parable. The parable of a woodcutter and a brahmachari who tells the woodcutter, go ahead. A man was cutting wood in a forest. When he was accosted by a brahmachari, a holy man, a sage, who was perhaps wandering in the forest alone. And the holy man said, go ahead. That's only 2 words. Now woodcutter didn't understand first. He came back home with his load of wood. Wood means ordinary wood that won't fetch much money in the market. Must have worked hard from morning till evening, accumulated a huge load of ordinary timber wood, which won't certainly bring a lot of money. So the woodcutter came home in the evening with this huge load of wood, wondering why the sage had told him to go ahead. Because the sage didn't say anything, he didn't elaborate. He said, go ahead. This passed away some days. You have to remember, as I said, this is an old language, old style. One day he was put in mind of the holy man's words. He was contemplating on the implication of the instruction from the holy sage. And he made up his mind that day to go further deep into the forest to cut wood. So normally he would just go enter the forest and cut some woods that are available. He won't go deep into the forest. Since after some days, she was thinking, well, what could be the implication of the statement? So he went little deeper into the forest. And what was his surprise to find that portion of the forest full of sandal trees, which are very costly. Of course, he brought cartloads of sandalwood to market and soon grew enormously rich. He became a rich man. In this way, again some days passed, when he was once more reminded of the injunction laid upon him by the holy man. Go ahead. He was thinking over this instruction. The holy man didn't ask him where to stop, just told him, go ahead. So he felt the words had a binding effect on his mind. So again, did he, from the resolution of going into forest or making a further advance, what was his, that means he went further and further, and went deeper and deeper into the forest. And what was his surprise? To find a silver mine close to the bed of a river. This he had never looked for, even in his dreams. He worked at the mines and brought away tons of silver, with which he made a splendid bargain. It has got a tremendous implication in the practical spiritual life of modern man. It's needless to say that after this he turned out to be one of the millionaires of the day, because he accumulated so much of silver that he became a millionaire. But once more, after the lapse of some years, did the holy man's words come back to his mind. Again he remembered after several years. The holy man didn't ask him to stop somewhere. So he thought he should go further ahead. He thought within him, the holy man did not bid me to stop at the silver mine, but he told me to go ahead, to go onward. This time he went across the river and came upon a gold mine, and finally on a diamond mine. Needless to add that he grew as rich as God of wealth, maybe as rich as the king of the country himself. Now, Sri Ramakrishna stops the parable. Now he turns to his disciples. He says, so go ahead, my children, and never lose sight of your ideal. Go onward and never stop until you have reached the goal. Reaching a particular stage, do not run away from the idea that you have come to your journey's end. Work is only the first stage of the journey. That's the point. In fact, work is the first stage, and work-oriented spiritual practice is also the first stage in spiritual evolution. Say, we sometimes earmark a fixed time for spiritual practices. In the morning, maybe a few hours, in the evening for a few hours, or maybe we decide to go on a pilgrimage. We read a particular book for maybe a few hours or half an hour every day. And then, normally what happens? We delude ourselves into the idea that we have really started spiritual life. We have now become Vedantis. We have become spiritual. It's like the woodcutter who is satisfied with sandalwood. So that's the idea. It's certainly better than, sandalwood is certainly more costly than ordinary wood, which will enable him to make both ends meet. But sandalwood will give him much more wealth. So, as he said, it's a kindergarten of spiritual life in Vivekananda's words. So one should start somewhere. And normally we have to begin with some kind of work-oriented spiritual practice. Work-oriented spiritual practice sometimes become mechanical. There is nothing wrong in being mechanical in spiritual practice at the beginning stage, but there is something terribly wrong if we consider that stage as the final goal. That's the idea behind. So, that's why in Indian spiritual tradition, some of the Mimamsa schools, the ritualistic schools of philosophers, they stopped with the mechanical practice. But Vedanta takes you far beyond that. The highest goal is to get the diamond mine, to take an illustration from the parable, which means spiritualizing our everyday life. That was the term which Swami Ashokananda ji used. Spiritualizing our total life. So the secular and spiritual become one. The secular merges with the spiritual. The line of demarcation, as I said yesterday, between the two is purely an imagination. So the line of demarcation slowly vanishes. At the beginning, as we evolve, move ahead from the stage of sandalwood to maybe a more costly kind of timber or maybe silver mine, we are trying to establish a link with the mechanical spiritual practice and everyday life. As we said, establishing a link with our formal spiritual practice and informal normal existence. See, in factories or offices or universities, we may be engaged in different work. So normally, from the practical point of view, we don't consider the office work as spiritual. That's something secular. So once we leave the temple or the church or a place of worship or the meditation room, we are leaving spirituality behind. We are entering the world of the secular. There is no link between the two. So this mistake should be corrected. That's the idea behind. So the idea, the mental impressions that we gather at the time of meditation should be linked, should be transported to the office, to the workplace, to the factory, or to the other normal settings in which we are engaged in normal so-called secular activities. So secular activities cease to be secular. They will not be secular. They are not secular when they are linked to the spiritual. So long as there is total regimentation, so long as they remain in two watertight compartments, the secular and spiritual are divided by a line of demarcation. But the moment we try to remember the mental impressions that we gather at the time of meditation, even while being engaged in the office work or even when we are busy in the workplace, then the secular merges with the spiritual. In fact, that is the ultimate goal, and that is like finding the diamond mine itself from the parable. So Sri Ramakrishna says, so go ahead, my children, and never lose sight of your ideal. Go onward and never stop until you have reached the goal. Reaching a particular stage, do not run away with the idea that you have come to your journey's end. So perhaps the fundamental difference between the great spiritual mystics or personalities, spiritual personalities and prophets, and the ordinary human beings is this. Ordinary human beings, spiritual seekers who do not make much progress, they stop somewhere and they feel contented with the sandalwoods and they don't go further. But you remember that, come back to the parable, the woodcutter got the sandalwood, sold at the market, made a lot of money, and then for some days he didn't remember this instruction. Again, maybe after several days, maybe a few years, he suddenly remembered, oh, the brahmachari, the holy man didn't ask me to stop anywhere. He just said, go ahead. So I should go ahead. I should not stop even with this sandalwood. This happened even after he got silver mine also. So after some years, again, he remembered. That was this recollection after some years enabled him to come back to the forest. Otherwise, he would no more come to the forest for cutting wood. Billionaire need not come to the forest for cutting wood. So somebody who got a little spiritual joy or something, then he stops there. And again, he may have to, in Vedanta tradition, he may have to be born again the next life. But he will certainly get some benefit. What he has accumulated in this life, the spiritual wealth that he has accumulated and put in the bank, the spiritual bank, won't be lost. It will help him to continue the journey, the spiritual pilgrimage, the next life. But it will be unwise to stop. And that's the main difference between the great prophets who didn't stop, who just went ahead till they got the diamond mine. So that's the idea behind it. Now the question is, again coming back to the parable. The Christian parables have been traditionally interpreted by many theologians from different angles. Sri Ramakrishna's parables also can be further investigated and discussed. You find more and more diamonds here also. Now the point is, how do we remember this instruction? That's a question. The woodcutter remembered. The woodcutter for some time forgot the instruction, but again he remembered, he recollected. That is why he went back to the forest again and went ahead and got silver mine, gold mine and diamond mine. How do we remember? How do we confront the problem of misplaced contentment? Misplaced satisfaction before we reach the goal. The idea is, great spiritual classics help us to recollect the instruction. Reading a holy book, listening to these ideas, or keeping our mind in tune with these spiritual ideas will work and will have the effect of pushing ourselves forward more and more till we reach the spiritual diamond mine. That's the idea behind. So we should keep in the company of great spiritual sages, not in a physical sense, because that's not always possible, but at least in a spiritual and intellectual sense. Yudhishthira in meditation spiritual practice, he gives an easy solution. He says, if you can't keep satsanga, holy company, you cannot meet saints and sages who passed away centuries back, but you can keep company with them and with their ideas by reading holy books which contain their ideas and then contemplating on their inner meaning and through contemplation. That's why Sri Ramakrishna says work is only the first stage of the journey. Bear in mind that doing acts unattached is exceedingly difficult. These are his words. And therefore the path of love is better suited at this stage. And that work, even if unattached, is not the end of your life, but only a means to an end. So even Karma Yoga, according to Vedantic tradition, Karma Yoga is the royal highway, but highway is not the goal. Highway is certainly the easiest path. Once you follow the highway, you reach your goal. But if you don't follow the highway and if you follow by lanes, and you may perhaps end up in a precipice. So the highway is highway gives the guarantee. The sure path, which if he follows, will take us to the goal, but the highway itself is not the destination. So karma yoga itself doesn't constitute the goal. It is only like the royal highway, the path that is sure to lead us to the goal. So that's the idea behind. Now, if there is any point to be discussed, you can initiate a discussion.
So how does Sri Ramakrishna reconcile ambition with being unattached to results? Like when you work, you're ambitious, right?
Yes, Sri Ramakrishna says, well, you sublimate even your ambition. You need a strong will to succeed in spiritual life. Mm-hmm. So give the idea of ambition a sublimation, That's the idea behind. So even ambition can be sublimated. Enthusiasm, efficiency, determination, which are all related to ambition, can be sublimated. That's the idea behind.
But how can perfection in work be attained if you're not ambitious?
Well, normally in actual practice, if we are not attached, work becomes more efficient. Really, in actual practice, because when we are doing a work with great attachment, we'll be anxious as to what will be the result of my work. This anxiety takes away a lot of mental and nervous energy, and it creates tension. That many management executives, many management institutes are focusing on this problem. How to create a tension-free workplace, which is actually a contradiction in term. Because a workplace can never be really tension-free. A place where karma yoga place can be tension-free. Yeah, but anyway, that attempt is certainly laudable. So, when we are engaged in work, we'll be very anxious as to what will be the result of the work that we are working for. And this anxiety takes away a lot of mental and nervous energy because it produces tension and a feeling of uncertainty. You just imagine the condition of people who have lost their jobs in the Bay Area. I mean, those who are very tense. And you ask others who have already got a good job, they are also very anxious. Now this got a universal application. Now, if we can combine the efficiency and enthusiasm of normal work and at the same time tranquility and peace, a tension-free mind, that's the goal. And this tension-free mind can be created only by reducing attachment, by becoming non-attached. Because attachment not to the work, but attachment to the result of the work is the root cause of all tensions, all stress. This is the idea.
So Swami Prabhupada, you have to talk about, dedication to work, Sri Ramakrishna and Arpanamas too. At the end of the day, you give up. You have all day. You have this ambition and this anxiety. At the end of the day, before spiritual practice, you have to surrender all that. The results, you surrender the results and turn it in terms of as a spiritual practice to a bhakti practice to be able to continue to do your spiritual practice even.
Yes, then this is practice in bhakti tradition, also karma yoga tradition, because whatever we do, if we can offer as an offering, surrender as an offering to God, then our anxiety and botheration, tension related to the result will be reduced, and we feel a huge burden is taken off our shoulders. But in Gita, Sri Krishna makes a statement. This should not lead to any kind of complacency or indifference or negligence. So that way Krishna makes a very interesting statement, anticipating maybe this question. He says, the difference between an enlightened spiritual person who performs karma yoga and an average person who is doing work with all kinds of attachment is this. The person who is doing all this work with great attachment is very enthusiastic and he has got a lot of zeal and ambition. Now, a karma yogi who performs his duty without attachment, he combines all this efficiency, all this enthusiasm, all this zeal, and the genius for effective work, minus selfishness. Selfishness is actually related to attachments from a psychological point of view. Selfishness. So that's the secret of great people who work for several years continuously without. Body may have to pay its cost, but mind never disillusioned or never depressed. They never felt so much. Body may become tired, but they were never depressed. So I would say ambition can be avoided, but zeal and enthusiasm can be combined along with Karma Yoga. Karma Yoga can be practiced with a great deal of enthusiasm, efficiency, and dedication. That can be done. Because when you think that you are going to offer the results and the word to God, you naturally feel that you should offer something that is decent to God. We don't offer a withered flower, maybe an old flower which has lost its color and fragrance. We don't place it at the altar. When we offer something to God, we make sure that it is a good flower, an attractive flower. So, a real karma yogi who wants to surrender the results of his action to God will work with great dedication. Whether it produces the expected result or not, he is not bothered because he is not attached. But there will be no negligence, no indifference, no complacency. There is no decrease in dedication because you are very particular that you want to offer a good flower to somebody whom you respect. God is so that's very important. So the dedication is something like Shraddha, we call it. The flower that you offer to God, the Lord, should be a good flower, not something that is rejected. So there will be no complacency or negligence in real work.
So that sort of completes what Sri Krishna says, to work you have the right, but not the fruits thereof. But the fruit should be a good fruit if you want to offer.
Yes. Often, this is a very popular karmanneva adhigaraste ma phaleshu kadachina ma karma phala hedu bhu mate sangostu akarmani. The second line makes his point. The second half of the verse makes clear. You should not be attached to inaction also. Never be attached to inaction. You should not be inactive. Now, in another verse, that's a famous verse, Saktaha karmani avidvamso yadha kurvanti bharata kuryan vidvan tatha asaktaha chigushu lokasankram. This statement is it. The difference between a real karma yogi who performs his actions without any attachment and an average person who is fully ambitious, fully attached. What's the difference? With regard to efficiency, dedication, organization skill, in all these matters, there is no difference between an ideal karma yogi, somebody who performs action without attachment, and an average person who is always ambitious and attached. Where is the difference? Difference is only in the matter of mental attitude. The karma yogi has no attachment. The other person, the ambitious person, is so much obsessed, so attached to the work and its result. That's the only difference. So that takes care of the possible misinterpretation that when you are not attached, you can just need not worry much about the kind of the quality of work or its result. There is no scope for that. It's very interesting. Mitsubishi was, of course, now it's not, it's a school of management. It was Mitsubishi Electrical, it's a Japanese school of management. They tried to combine this peace, harmony, and peace, harmony, and three P's. The other one I forgot. Peace, harmony, and something else combined. In work, there's supposed to be a superior concept of management ethics than Peter Drucker. But anyhow, so he took many of these ideas from Zen Buddhism as interpreted by Suzuki, and in fact he also quotes some of the ideas from the Gita in his magnum opus.
So if spiritual practices are offered properly, then the question of spiritual progress, which we discussed in the first day, question of spiritual progress will not exist then. If we offer our spiritual practices.
Oh, you mean you give to God, so it's no more ours. You mean that's what you mean?
No, and then we don't, oh my God, I've been meditating for 15 years, then that spiritual, where am I? That measuring scale in spiritual life.
No, in fact, I didn't fully understand, but please correct me if I did not understand your question correctly. One point that I may not correct is you said that if you surrender the results of our spiritual activities to God, then we won't have any result. The result will go to God, so we'll become spiritually. That's what you mean?
No, Swami. Then if we really do that, then we won't be thinking about spiritual progress. Is that correct?
Oh, yes. In
because
fact,
that came up in day one about
yes. You mean if you are not very much attached, if you don't bother much about the result of a spiritual work, then we won't be very cautious. We won't be concerned about progress we are making. Isn't it so? Really speaking, we won't feel the need to be concerned about our spiritual progress in actual practice. This is a point to be remembered. So we should always remember the illustration, somebody sitting at the banks of the river without making a plunge. Now, the point is, when we actually enter the spiritual life, meditation and japa, all this practice, without bothering much about the result, then we feel that we won't feel the need to be concerned about the progress we are making. We won't feel the anxiety, the concern, the need to bother about the degree of spiritual progress that we are making. In fact, that is the surest sign of inner tranquility and peace. In fact, the very need of you, let me see how far I have gone. That shows that we are really not not successful in practicing non-attachment. So that's why non-attachment is not negligence, but at the same time, it doesn't in any way reduce the degree of dedication. Dedication, care, proper concentration, all this should be there, but without attachment. It is this attachment that produces the anxiety to take stock of how far we have progressed. So if we really enter, as Sri Ramakrishna says, if we enter the river, take a plunge, then you'll be in a different world. Our mind will undergo a complete transformation. When we are sitting on the bank of the river, without entering the river, without touching the water, then we have one idea of how it would be like if I enter the river. The moment you enter the river, everything changes. So similarly, when we take the first step in practical spiritual life, many of the questions that normally confront us at the beginning stage will vanish. That's the idea behind it. And sometimes these tensions, all these questions may emerge in the mind, but we should always remember this is part of the game of spiritual life. It is not something to be frightened about, to be concerned about. It's a practical game. All people, you look at the life of Sri Ramakrishna, or look at the life of many of these well-known mystics, See, they had to undergo and they had to confront many more challenges, infinitely much more difficult problems in their life than any of us. So then we understand it is part of the game of spiritual life. Otherwise, in material life, we may have to confront many more problems. Because we are entered spiritual life, these problems in this form emerge. And they are very natural. So we are in the company of the most distinguished members of humanity. We are in the company of Saint Francis of Assisi, or Jesus, Buddha, Shankaracharya, Ramakrishna, and all. Because all these great spiritual personalities had to undergo. So we are in distinguished company, we can feel. There is we are not in any way isolated. There is nothing special, exclusive to us. That's right. I think now we have reached the time. Perhaps there is no more discussion needed. Shall we conclude now? The discussion never ends, of course. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Om Peace, Peace, Peace.